if Bitcoin has to be saved by cramming data into blocks, and 100% of the activity on Bitcoin is data and 0% of the activity on Bitcoin is payments, then can you really call Bitcoin money anymore?
I think there's a lot of people mad about spam, and they are wanting to fight somebody, and so punching at developers or something. But I think to realistically even do something predictable about spam, you have to think forward about the economic implications and the probable next actions of your opponent. You can't play chess not looking more than one step ahead, right?
Hi everyone, welcome to Unchained, your no-hype resource for all things crypto. I'm your host, Laura Shin. Today's episode is brought to you by Mantle and Aptos. Mantle is pioneering blockchain for banking, a revolutionary new category at the intersection of TradFi and Web3. Follow Mantle_official to learn more. Aptos is the no-compromise infrastructure for global financial markets. Fast, reliable, and 100 times more cost-efficient than other blockchains. See for yourself why Aptos is the chain of choice for institutions, users, and developers alike at the Aptos Experience, October 15th and 16th in Brooklyn. Today's episode is about Bitcoin Core versus Bitcoin Knots. Here to discuss are Chris Guida, Bitcoin and Lightning ecosystem dev and educator, and Adam Back, CEO of Blockstream. Welcome, Chris and Adam.
Laura,
Hi.
Thanks for having me.
Hi, everyone.
So the Bitcoin Core versus Bitcoin Knots debate has been brewing for some time. And the two of you are on opposing sides of this debate. But before we get to the debate portion, let's make sure that the audience has the necessary background to follow the conversation. Can you each give your perspective on what the debate is about and how it started? And Adam, why don't we start with you?
Spam is probably as old as the internet itself, and sort of an arms race, if you will. Like, it seems impossible to outright stop it. And so people engage in various attempts to fight it. And the attempts to fight spam can have side effects. So,
and how are you defining spam in this situation?
Well, I mean, that's an interesting question in the Bitcoin context, right? But an uncontroversial one that I think most people dislike, apart from, of course, the spam industrial complex that is spending $1 million a day on fees, is the image spam, because it's grotesquely inefficient, right? So, of course, there are other kinds of spam which get increasingly grey, but maybe we can look at the image spam because that's something more plausible that you could do something about.
And you're talking about things like ordinals or any kind of NFT-ish type thing on blockchain, on the Bitcoin blockchain. And I mean, like, to my mind, to be super strict about it would probably be anything that's like a non-transaction information on the Bitcoin blockchain. Would that be more comprehensive?
I mean, it's a little grey because there is some data. I mean, the thing that started this whole debate was a small amount of anchor data for a new type of layer 2, the BitVM, and there are a number of projects working on that. And so it's not uncommon for some kinds of financial activity on Bitcoin to use anchors. For example, some of the anonymity, some of the coin join type things. The Samurai wallet uses something. So there, timestamp is not necessarily financial related, but the rest are sort of financial or privacy. I think where people start to push on ordinals, well, sort of other assets on top of Bitcoin, gets pretty grey, right? Because there are many protocols going back to Mastercoin Omni, which Tether rides on, and probably some it's counterparty thing.
Yeah. By the way, Adam, I'm sorry. You're cutting out a little bit. I don't know if there's a way to shore up your internet. Maybe go ahead and work on that for a second. And Chris, why don't you go ahead and jump in with what you think this debate about knots versus core is about?
Yeah. Cool. So yeah, thanks. I think it's a really important conversation. I think, as Adam said, it's been going on since the beginning of the internet, and of course, since the beginning of Bitcoin. I think there's always been a tension between the side that is more worried about spam and the side that is more worried about censorship. And in the extreme, extreme spam filtration could be seen as an attempt to censor.
And just to, so because you are on the side of knots, which, for people who have been following this, they would consider that side as more kind of pro censorship ish. You can dispute that if you want, but
yes,
the point is, how does your side define spam on Bitcoin?
So storing data in the blockchain is spam, because it's a different use case from what Bitcoin is intended for. Bitcoin is intended for payments. It's intended to be money so that you can send money to people. And so when you're using it for data storage, that is a different use case altogether with completely different economics, and it competes with the payment use case. And in the extreme, my side's assertion is that if you gave data and payments a level playing field with respect to fees per block space, then data would crush payments, so that's why we're more worried about spam in this moment. That's not to say that we're not worried about censorship. I want to clear that up. I think censorship is potentially a problem, but I think that spam in this moment is a worse threat.
And would you agree with Adam that the kind of main catalyst, because which is what you described there, that like storage, it's a broad category, but the main catalyst behind it is NFT like objects associated with the Bitcoin blockchain. Is that?
Yeah. So there's all sorts of harmful ways to put data in the chain. There's all sorts of threats to Bitcoin that can arise as you raise the limit of what is allowed to be in the chain. And we can talk about ways to solve that. But the biggest one recently has been, for lack of a better term, shitcoins, or as I like to call them, on altcoin Ponzi's. And these cause a lot of disruption on Bitcoin because they cause something called UTXO set bloat, which maybe your more technical listeners know what that is. Basically slows down IBD and makes it more costly to run a node. And then the other big problem is that it causes high fees, which crowds out merchants that are trying to use Lightning to accept Bitcoin in their shops, for example. And
just to explain the UTX bloat, like basically, I saw this in so I'm going to say it in very layman's terms, and I might get it wrong, but basically, in order to create these NFTs or send them or something, I forget what it was. There would have to be a transaction that created this extraneous UTXO that was like burning something. I forget all the details about this, but the point is like what they're trying to do is to not have that waste anymore. That's like part of the change that they want.
Yes. Yeah. Basically, there was a thing called BRC20 that happened during 2023 and 2024. And it was basically an altcoin Ponzi meta protocol for NFTs or FTs, fungible tokens. And basically, they just created all of this noise on Bitcoin. They made it harder to sync a node, and they made it harder to transact as somebody who's just trying to do payments. And so those are the most harmful kinds of spam. But if we just raise it to 100 kilobytes, I mean, there's all sorts of other nasty things that might happen as well.
And one last thing that I wanted to ask, because, famously Satoshi in the very first block of the Bitcoin blockchain included something that was like non-transaction data, which is the message, the headline from the Times of London. And I wondered, does that fall in the same category of things that we're talking about or no? It
doesn't. So in one sense, it's sort of a superficial sense it does, because it is data that is in the blockchain. But in sort of a relevant sense, it's completely different, because it's not spam. Satoshi was not spamming the blockchain by putting proof of the creation of the Genesis block, January 3rd, 2009, and sort of hinting at the purpose of Bitcoin, which was this Chancellor on the Brink statement. So I mean, yeah, that the important point with that is you can put a message up to 100 bytes in every block header, but you have to mine a block to do that. And so there's no way for it to be abused for spam in the same way that these altcoin Ponzi's are doing.
Okay. So Adam, let's return to you. I had to cut you off to make sure that people could even hear what you were saying. So go ahead and finish on, what you think this debate is about, and hopefully your internet is a little bit better.
Yeah, my internet's plenty fast, so I tried it without the headset in case that was the issue.
Okay.
So I think we got onto the topic, the image spam is just unambiguously wasteful. But the thing which gets increasingly grey is the sort of layer 2 meta protocols. There are many of them, so I started enumerating Mastercoin, later rebranded to Omni, Counterparty, recently BRC20 runes, which carried a bunch of meme coins, I think over 100 million outputs, probably mostly abandoned when they got rug pulled, and about 3.5 million images. And also shouldn't forget RGB and Taproot assets. So, the knots is blocking some of those. And I think it gets pretty grey because some of them can be used to carry Tether, probably some bank, demo or actual
Which ones?
assets.
Which ones is knots blocking?
So one of the BRC20 or rune, I think they set they block a bunch of stuff, right? They block Lightning Truck Fix. They block one of BRC20 or runes because the other one is less wasteful. They block some samurai.
We should specify what you mean by block. So you're talking about by default. But if the user wants to unblock those things, it's just a little setting.
Right. Well, the defaults are blocking all those things or filtering them out, right? Of course, when other nodes in the network that are more constructively processing things, let's say, mine them, then, relay them and then they get mined, then of course, any Bitcoin node of any kind will store and relay them. So I think that there is some sort of side effect from this, which is it's not really very well targeted. And some of those layer 2s carry some of the kind of color coin related things, basically, right? They carry Tether, they carry probably some real world assets, and I think Knots, before the spam drama, has been having some kind of pedantic argument with Samurai Wallet and blocking their mixed protocol. So not to get too, I'm just saying it's grey, and it's not clear which is worse actually, because we're focusing on the image spam because it's just clearly unambiguously wasteful of block resources, but.
Just to be clear, Knots is not blocking Whirlpool transactions, like the privacy related transactions, intentionally. That's not intentional. That's just an artifact of the privacy guys being a bit just hard to deal with. I've actually had conversations with them on Twitter, like, hey, how much space do you need to relay your transaction? And they just won't say, and they're just like, screw you, censorer, and I'm like, okay, well, sorry to be edgy, but you're not actually really not helpful.
Let's just say it takes two to tango, right? Because there are lots of users of Samurai who were complaining about this, and Luke was also not helpful. And this dates before the spam, so it's not really as much about the spam.
Yeah, so I feel like you guys are getting a little bit in the weeds, so let's just keep zoomed out just for one more question. So basically what is happening is, and please correct me if I'm not explaining any of this correctly, because obviously I'm not a developer. So there's a Bitcoin opcode, and opcodes, are kind of like sort of the instructions for how the Bitcoin blockchain is coded, and it's called op return. And this would allow arbitrary data or messages to be embedded in Bitcoin blockchains, in Bitcoin transactions. And this is kind of at the center of what this Bitcoin Core versus Knots debate is about, right? And so let's just make sure everybody understands the two sides. So Bitcoin Core plans to do what? And then Bitcoin Knots is against that. So maybe Adam, why don't you explain like what Bitcoin Core is going to do? And then Chris, you can explain what Knots opposes and prefers.
I think it's a bit of a red herring really, because op return has been standard 1 megabyte. Well, actually, sorry, I should say consensus valid. So that's the rules of the network, what gets enforced. Since 2014, when it was introduced, there was a filter or policy limit, which is not, it's just what a node will relay. It's not enforced by miners or full nodes. So it's pretty easy to bypass it if somebody really wants to. And so then the recent wave of spam, which, agitate people, basically started in the altcoin winter, when Bitcoin VC funding doubled and altcoin VC funding dried up. And so a number of altcoins relabeled themselves as Bitcoin layer 2s and bought their kind of meme coins and NFT collections to Bitcoin. And
you're talking about like starting in 2022?
Yeah, something in that range. And so, I think that's probably the big driving factor, because realistically, this spam could have been sent anytime from 2009 in various encodings. I mean, as soon as you have a programming system, it can have data hidden in it in numerous ways, right? And so then it still gets complicated, but basically they are heavily hiding images, at least, in Taproot script, which has a discount, which relates back to 2017 SegWit introduction, and Taproot itself didn't come until 2021. So the image spam is going in there, and so what Bitcoin developers did was to see. So actually, the original introduction of op return in this format in 2014 was reactive to people spamming, or more like lazy application developers putting small app messages in inefficient ways. And then one of the most inefficient ways to stash data in the Bitcoin blockchain is in fake public keys. So public keys being, an address, basically what you would send a transaction to. And so they just put the data instead of an address. And that actually is pretty bad, because it gums up the UTXO set, which is the least scalable part of running a node. So that will overload your node faster than anything else. And so this debate in 2014 has really been running since 2010. I only got involved in 2013, but it was already raging then. And so the op return was basically a realization that, look, there's nothing we can do talking to the app developers between getting angry, making suggestions, to even remotely influence them. Nothing so corrosive as a lazy app developer, basically. And so they made the op return to at least say, well, if you're going to store application data and we can't deter you from it, at least do it in a way that doesn't, gun the node up. So the point of the op return is it doesn't need to go in the UTXO set. And so it's less harmful. And so now with the all of the spam happening in Taproot, actually, like in a different script format, then this sort of same situation recurred, which is some new app devs wrote up it's kind of layer 2 anchor protocol called Citria, which is an instance of the BitVM protocol. And they wrote up a paper implementation saying, well, they were going to store 80 bytes within the policy limit and then 2 fake pub keys, because what they had, their anchor didn't fit. And so, the developers saw this as it's complete, mirror image of what happened in 2014. So rather than do nothing and have that, have them start to do that, we don't know if it will take off or not. It's a new protocol, but once people implemented things, they won't generally want to change them for backwards compatibility reasons. And so they proposed to increase the op return to allow for that. And while they're in it, they realized that in recent history, the developers have been quite slow to adapt to network conditions. So full RBF was one example. 98% of miners were mining those before Bitcoin adapted policy, before the code adapted the policy to catch up. And the minimum fee rate dropping below 1 sat per vbyte is another great example. We could talk about that more. That's also recent and another feature in Bitcoin 30. And so then the reaction to increase the op return is to say, well, op return is, above 160, which probably people would have been happier with. That's what I suggested. But anyway, the argument for increasing it or basically removing it is, look, it's actually preferable if people would put images in op return than putting them in inscriptions. Of course, preferable we don't do it at all, but given that we don't seem to prevent that, particularly in a decentralized state resistant system, then it would be less bad for the node and less dangerous in terms of tinkering with active code if they would do it in op return. So let's not create any disincentive to do that. Now, of course, they're probably not going to do it in practice because it's 4 times more expensive, which is a different problem. But at least things like Citria are not incentivized to do a worse thing.
Okay,
So
wait.
that's the start.
Yeah, you explained so much there. So let me just make sure at least that I understood it, because probably some huge percentage of people listening to this are either more like on my level of their understanding of the technical aspects or even less. So this, the op return limit, I think currently is 83 bytes. Am I correct about that? Or okay.
That's the policy limit, yeah.
And so essentially the change that Core is proposing, and in fact, that is perhaps going to go live on Friday, is to, or as you said, to not put a cap on it, which would effectively raise it to 4 megabytes. So for, again, non-technical people, that's raising it basically from 83 to essentially 4 million, which is like a huge...
1 million.
Am I wrong about that? Or what?
1 megabyte.
1 million.
Oh, it's 1 megabyte. Oh, okay,
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
Yeah,
still,
so
83 to 1 million. What?
If you put things in the output, you get up to 1 million bytes, and if you put things in the input, you get up to 4 million bytes because of how the SegWit discount works.
And wait a second, we're also getting the things crossed a bit, because if people care about filters and policy, there's a 100 kilobyte limit on transaction size, but realistically, policy doesn't prevent that much. That's what people have learned over the last few years.
So I have a lot of responses to all of those things.
Okay, go ahead, Chris.
I don't think that's a correct. Well, okay. So you explained the core dev's position as well as they've explained it so far, and I don't think it's a credible rationale. And the reason for that is because Citria, first of all, has not launched on mainnet yet. Second of all, their transaction only puts 64 bytes into the UTXO set, and and the BRC20 put like 7 gigabytes into the UTXO set. So, and furthermore, if you look at how the Citria's BitVM bridge works, that transaction is never supposed to happen. So the rationale for creating for ripping out this very useful filter, the op return filter, which has existed for decades without any side effects. I know that you say there are side effects, but I haven't seen any evidence for these side effects. But so anyway, the rationale from Core is, okay, they might put 64 bytes into the UTXO set, so we're going to completely remove this filter that that generally prevents spam and discourages people from spamming. In order to fix and it doesn't fix the problem. The problem that is being solved is tiny and effectively non-existent, and then the fix is much worse than the disease that it purports to cure.
And wait, I'm sorry, Chris. So why is it so much worse? Just explain why you guys are so opposed.
Yeah. So what happened is in 2014, as Adam said, we agreed that we would give these lazy application developers a little space of 80 bytes where they could put arbitrary data to build their applications. And that was the limit. That was, nobody wanted, Bitcoiners did not want to allow any more than that. And that was enshrined in a thing called data carrier size. That was the default for 10 years, and it worked wonderfully. And then in 2023, late 2022, Casey Rodamore found a hack, which is called the inscriptions hack, or the inscriptions. It's called inscribing, I guess. And it's a different way of putting arbitrary data in the chain, which is not filtered, right? He found a way to kind of sneak data in a way that nodes would still relay, even though it violated that 80 byte limit that everybody agreed to in 2014. And so what happened is there was a bunch of spam. There were a bunch of altcoin Ponzi's that launched on top of this new type of embedding data, and this caused a bunch of UTXO bloat. We can get into this, even though inscriptions are not stored in the UTXO set. So this op returns are not stored in the UTXO set, so they won't cause UTXO set bloat, is an invalid claim because inscriptions are the same way, and they still caused UTXO bloat. And so basically what happened is there was this huge problem. All of these node runners that I was working with to try and, be merchant nodes or lightning routing nodes, were struggling to sync the chain. And it was blindingly obvious to anybody paying attention that it was because of these spam attacks. And it was also blindingly obvious that Bitcoin Core could have completely prevented this if they had just filtered inscriptions in the same way that op return is being filtered. And so, this went on for 2 years. Nodes got more expensive to run. And then finally, Core notices that there's UTXO set load. And instead of actually fixing the problem by filtering the spam, they decide to make the problem much worse by effectively making the inscribing method officially sanctioned. By basically saying, well, everybody can already inscribe data anyway in the input, so we might as well just make the op return output larger. And the reason why this is so much worse is because in 2014, what made the spammers go away is that the Bitcoin devs were hostile to spam. And Vitalik even tweeted about this. He said, the reason why I left Bitcoin and went and made my own blockchain is because the Bitcoin core devs would be at war. And so, it's been proven in history that if we just counter all of their moves, they'll eventually get kind of demoralized and frustrated, and they'll just go to other chains. So that's the real solution. The real solution is be hostile to spam, and lifting the op return limit is the opposite of that. It encourages the spam.
Okay, I like Chris, though. I guess the one thing is, a lot of people like one of the core value propositions of blockchains is that they're censorship resistant, and so it's like I think what a lot of people.
Spam filtration doesn't change that. Bitcoin is censorship resistant because of proof of work. Because you can mine a transaction as long as you have energy to mine a Bitcoin block, or as long as you know a miner that has energy to mine a Bitcoin block. So it's very difficult to censor Bitcoin, even with widespread. Even if everybody wasn't relaying transactions at all, Bitcoin would still be censorship resistant. So I don't think that's as big of a concern as the other side seems to think. But
would you concede
with them about it.
But would you concede that your side is trying to censor, which I think that's what Adam's side is saying,
No, so censorship and spam filtration are different things. Censorship is trying to entirely block a transaction. As Adam already noted, this is impossible in Bitcoin. You can't be like, somebody can't put that piece of data on the blockchain and just like block them from doing it. As Adam said, and as everybody knows, Bitcoin is censorship resistant. You can't do that. However, what spam filtration is useful for is if there's high volume spam, then you put a filter in. Now the spam, instead of at this level, it's much, much, much lower. And you can actually see this if you look at the data. The op return filter results in 99% fewer op returns that are larger than 80 bytes. And if you look at the data, there's like a 99% drop off right at 80 bytes. So this notion that filters do nothing and never work is disingenuous. I think the other side that they're being dishonest.
I shouldn't assume bad faith. I can debunk all of that. So the point is that because Bitcoin is a censorship resistant network, as we just described, it's flood fill. So there are many routes through the network, and so consequently, it's going to be pretty hard for filtering to work, right? So it distinguishes between policy and filtering. So it should be clear that there are some policies that work quite well in the network. For example, fees are enforced by policy, which is just by nodes. There are different types of policy enforcing different things. And filters are, the sort of filter on the maximum size of an op return is another common policy. And those policies have, changed de facto in the network in pretty dramatic, remarkable ways over the last few years. So, for example, full RBF, that was a policy that completely broke. Basically, miners and users decided that they didn't want it anymore or something. Some users did want to keep it. I was on the side of wanting to keep that one because I thought that was enabling their use case. A more timely in terms of happening recently, and also a feature of Core 30. So Bitcoin 30 has three major features. One is truck, which is a fix for a lightning pinging attack, also implemented as a policy. Another is the sub 1 sat per vbyte minimum relay configuration, which has changed, reacted to the network. And that one's quite topical to this. And the last one is the discussed op return relay increase. So I think it's useful to think about the sub 1 sat per vbyte. So there's some interesting facts with the Bitcoin network. Each node is connecting to lots of other nodes. And so what has been observed empirically is that if about 10%, it depends what the miners are doing, what the average node is doing, but something in that region, if 10% of nodes decide to relax a filter, the filter stops having any effect in the network as a whole. And there's a reason for that, which is, there's many ways that data can route through the network, and just organically connecting at random, that means that a sort of tolerant minority can change a policy or a filter from working to not working. And that was the case with the 1 sat per vbyte, which is the minimum fee rate that would get relayed. And it's quite an interesting and instructive one because it had near universal enforcement, because all prior versions of Bitcoin and all versions of knots were filtering or blocking that. And yet a subset of users memed it into existence for whatever reason. And there's some people on Twitter who said they participated in it. They decided as the blocks weren't full, Bitcoin price has gone up, 1 sat per vbyte was too high. Some miners went along with it. They changed their nodes. And what do you know? Now it works everywhere, right? And so that is an example of how filters can appear to work until they don't. And so I think if you look at the range of policies that work versus not, it seems to be something like, as long as users don't have a strong economic incentive to bypass them, and or as long as miners, go along with that, right? So some miners will process them, then it's going to break wide open. And so you can see that effectively with the sub 1 sat per vbyte change, and that's one of the changes in Bitcoin Core. Full RBF, I mentioned, that happened in the past, and Core felt that the Bitcoin developers felt that they were behind the times. It got to 98% deployment before they reacted. So I think, if anything, you could say they are again reacting, because the default in the network for relaying large op returns is effectively 100 kilobytes, right?
Great.
It's not.
Chris, I know you want to respond, so just hold your thought. We're going to take a very quick ad break from the sponsors make this show possible, and we'll be right back. Mantle leads the establishment of blockchain for banking as the next frontier. UR is the access layer that transforms Mantle Network into a purpose-built vertical platform, the blockchain for banking, that enables financial services on-chain. UR unifies and vertically aligns Mantle's focus on payments, trading, and assets. MI4, METH protocol, functions FBTC, supported by developer grants, ecosystem incentives, and the industry-leading distribution platform through the UR app, Reward Station, and Bybit launch pool. All economic activity within UR will be captured by Mantle Network to further drive value to token holders and establish its significance in blockchain for banking. Follow Mantle_official to learn more. Over 3.4 billion transactions processed without disruption. More than $1 billion in stablecoins circulating. Over $720 million in real-world assets tokenized on-chain. All delivered with sub-second finality, block times under 100 milliseconds, and fees less than 1/10 of a cent, making Aptos more than 100 times cheaper than other leading blockchains. Built by the team behind the DM project at Meta, Aptos is what blockchain performance looks like when it's built for global financial markets. Discover why global institutions like BlackRock, Franklin Templeton, and NBC Universal are building on Aptos, and see for yourself at the Aptos Experience, October 15th to 16th in Brooklyn. Back to my conversation with Chris and Adam. So Chris, I'm going to let you go with your response, but then I have specific questions for each of you because there's certain parts of the various arguments that we have not touched on. So go ahead, Chris.
Okay, yeah, I'll try to be brief. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right, perfect. Yeah. So Adam introduced two examples where filters that were filtered by default in Bitcoin Core were circumvented and eventually Core sort of surrendered and ended up turning off the filter. And this was full RBF in 2021, 2022, something like that. And then much more recently, subsat transactions, which basically transactions that pay very low fees. And so this doesn't prove that filters don't work. Adam's making the assertion that, well, filters never work because we have these examples that sort of counterexamples, right? But this doesn't prove that filters never work. It just means that filters don't work sometimes. And the counterexample to the claim that filters never work, of course, is the op-return filter, which is the thing that Core is trying to remove. This filter works very well. It's been in existence since 2014. It has attenuated the amount of op-returns that get confirmed in the blockchain by 99%, over 99%. It's wildly successful. Yes, of course, a determined adversary, a determined spammer can just post one or two of these transactions or 10 or whatever, but they're not going to be able to do a high volume spam attack of the type that we saw on inscriptions. Obviously, because inscriptions were standard and were being relayed. Nobody would make an altcoin Ponzi meta protocol on top of op-returns right now because op-returns are not standard and those transactions would not get relayed. So I think it's time for Core to stop saying filters don't work. I think a much more interesting conversation is filters work sometimes, and then we can have a discussion about when do they work and when do they not work. And I think there are very good explanations for why those two examples Adam brought up happened that way.
Okay, so I'm going to go through various of the criticisms that I've seen of both sides, just so we can see what each of your responses would be. So, Chris, I'll start with you. One that I've seen is that this change that Core wants to put through on Friday would help make mining more sustainable. And I'm sure everybody knows that there is this question about the sustainability of transaction fees for Bitcoin. Obviously, like the block reward will continue to be produced until roughly 100 and change years in the future. But there are some people who have modeled out that they actually think that the fees may not sustain the blockchain even as soon as 10 to 15 years out. So there are some people who are saying that this change could make mining and therefore the security of the network more sustainable. And so, Chris, I wondered if you could respond to that criticism of Knox.
Yeah, I think that's FUD. I don't see a reason to think that low fees is going to somehow destroy the mining industry anytime soon. I mean, maybe once the block subsidy. I mean, so right now, miners earn fees in two different ways. There's a block subsidy, which is new Bitcoins. Right now, it's 3 1/8 Bitcoins every block. And the fees are much, 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 much lower than that. So there's the subsidy and there's the fees, and those are the two ways that miners get fees. And as you mentioned, Laura, over time, as the halvings continue to happen, eventually the subsidy is going to go from 3 1/8 to 0, 100 years from now. And at that point, it might be worth revisiting the economics of mining. But for now, I think mostly it's just kind of outrage coming out of the mining industry, like, oh no, we don't have enough fees. And the thing is, that's not really a thing that can happen. Like if all of the miners are earning less fees, then their hash rate will be lower than it otherwise would be, and the difficulty will adjust down, and then everybody will be just as profitable as before. So I don't. First of all, I don't think that's a good threat. And second of all, the solution proposed is not a solution because, as I alluded to earlier, if Bitcoin has to be saved by cramming data into blocks, and 100% of Bitcoin, of the activity on Bitcoin is data, and 0% of the activity on Bitcoin is payments, then can you really call Bitcoin money anymore? I mean, at that point, it's not money. So I mean, I think it's really important that money and payments be the dominant use case, and the only way to ensure that is by trying to rate limit these low value use cases that compete with high value use cases.
I share Chris's view that that's a bit of a red herring. I think the long-term fee budget is a different longer-term topic that's not really been raised. I mean, presumably some fringe group raised it somewhere, but I don't think most people are concerned mixing these two topics. So I think the arguments about the op-return parameter seem to be a bit confused, because I think both sides will admit that taproot inscriptions are 4 times cheaper, so it's unlikely that spammers would be motivated to use op-return for large data items. I mean, they would for small data items, we fish. And then the second point is, even if they did use it in the alternative to using taproot script hiding, that's actually a good thing, because, good thing, a less bad thing, let's be clear, that it results in less data, and they pay more fees. So, you can't have it both ways, right? Either they're going to use it or they're not. I think we agree they're not. But if they did, why are people fighting so hard to prevent them doing it? Because it would actually be less overhead on the nodes, less data, and printable outputs.
Yeah. So the specific threat is that, so as we know, shitcoiners love to basically do the same thing as before, but with a slight tweak that makes it look novel, and then it causes a new hype cycle. So we saw this with inscriptions, we saw this with BRC20, we saw this with runes. BRC20 was like, oh, there's a fungible token protocol on top of this new data embedding protocol, inscriptions, which uses ordinals, and so that caused a craze. And then Casey was able to kind of help kill BRC20 by introducing runes, and that was popular because that's this new way of encoding data that that was created by the creator of ordinals, and so that caused a hype cycle. It just needs to be something that appears to be novel. It may not even be that innovative, but as long as it's just a little bit different from what happened before, it will cause another hype cycle. And so the specific threat with removing the opportun filter is that some degen is going to make a meta protocol on top of opportuns once we remove the filter. It's inevitable, and it's going to cause the same amount of at least high fee spam, and maybe also UTXO set load spam. And it probably will be even worse because now we've rolled out the red carpet for the spammers, and we've said, yeah, come on in, all you Ethereum people, come on in. We don't mind.
Okay. So
I think that's a mischaracterization that anybody wants to spam. The Bitcoin developers that you're maligning have been arguing against spam since 2010, maybe before, right? That's even why the op return got included in the first place. And I think you have to cast it forward a bit, right? Because there are other worse ways to spam, which they have been using in the past. The segue mechanism, the discount, the op return, the taproot are all relatively new things, and people were spamming before that. And if you
but my point is that the majority of the UTXO set is BRC20s. If you look at the UTXO set right now, the majority is BRC20s. So the worst threat is these altcoin meta protocols.
Okay, so actually, let me build on that because, Adam, I did want to ask for your side. One of the criticisms that I've seen is that when you add all this data to the blockchain for non-priority reasons, that can create an extra burden for the nodes. And so basically, that kind of would imperil would imperil the decentralization of the network, because essentially miners would need to have higher hardware requirements. And so therefore, it kind of blocks out smaller miners. And so, is that a risk that you acknowledge for what Core is trying to push through?
No, not really, because the BitMEX research has pointed out, and I believe it's correct, though, a bit of a kind of prank comment that actually lots of big images is a lot lower overhead for a node, because the thing that slows a node down at worst is the BRC20s, lots of abandoned UTXOs, large UTXO set. So actually, a blockchain full of images is actually the simplest and lightest thing for a node to process, right? But that's nothing anybody wants. So it's kind of
right, but that's not what they do, right? They create these meta protocols on top of the images, and that's where you get these this damage.
What do you mean meta protocols and split images? You mean, but I think we're mixing two things. One is the image spam, which is large. The other is the small items like Omni, Counterparty, BRC20, fake pub keys, taproot assets, RGB, right? So if you some can filter, some of them you can't. So, I think it's instructive to consider the scorched earth, absolutely strongest fight you could put up to stop spam or to mitigate, minimize, push them out, right? And it's pretty dramatic, and I'm not advocating to do it, but you could soft fork out Taproot, you could soft fork out Segway. Of course, you'd have to do that carefully to not lose a bunch of people's money and undo years of work. You'd soft fork out or deprecate op return. And now let's say that the altcoin winter happened after you've done that. Do you think they would stop spamming? I don't think so at all. They would just use the Bitcoin stamps protocol, which is far worse. And they can store arbitrary amounts of data in it. The overhead is not even that high percentage-wise. And that would really blow out the UTXO set. So I think, in a way, even though the image spam is the most gratuitously waste in a looked at in a simple way. In some other ways, in terms of node overhead and impact on the functionality of Bitcoin, these small data items that are for meme coins are actually more harmful. And, incrementally pushing down and playing the arms race, it leads to a worse place, right? So yes, everybody wants to control spam, but you have to play chess and think you move it to the head. So if each thing you incrementally do has an obvious counteraction that actually makes things worse for the Bitcoin users, for the node runners, then it's sort of, I use this analogy of it's a Star Trek thing, right? The Klingons, the Vulcans, and the Ferengi. So ultimately, I think there's a lot of people mad about spam, and they are sort of wanting to fight somebody, and so punching at developers or something. But I think to realistically even do something predictable about spam, you have to think forward about the economic implications and the probable next actions of your opponent. You can't play chess not looking more than one step ahead, right?
So basically, Adam, if I'm understanding your position, it's that you're not for like things like BRC20 data and all that flooding Bitcoin, but when you look at all the available choices, you feel like what Core is deciding to do is like the least bad of a number of like unsavory options. Is that kind of the way to think about it? It's futile to fight this, so might as well figure out the best way to allow it that results in the least harm to Bitcoin. Is that a way to summarize it?
It's not exactly futile, but you got to be careful that the cure isn't worse than the problem, right? And that was effectively the frustrating reality that led to the creation of OpReturn in 2014, is that people had tried for 4 years to persuade people and, shout at them, reason with them, give them sample code to even influence the behavior completely unsuccessfully. And so they figured, well, let's at least make a way to do it that's less damaging. Now, in any internet protocol, since the internet's existed, it's possible to stuff spam into all kinds of protocol fields. Spam filtering has never worked in the past, and it's far harder to do it in Bitcoin because Bitcoin is decentralized and censorship resistant architecture, right? We get spam in email, which has a central server. So how are we thinking it's going to be easy? So that's not to say it's impossible. I would say what we have to do is do it in a way that is economically rational for the people that we would wish would stop, right?
Okay,
you have to bear in mind that the opponent is a rational economic actor that has about $1 billion a year budget, $1 million a day in fees. And it's not realistic to imagine they're just going to stop because we tweak some parameters. At the end of the day, as long as they're consensus valid, they can go to a miner and get their transactions processed. And even if you completely, if 100% of the nodes were filtering everything they want to do, they will still do it for the simple reason that they have a lot of money. If no miners would go along with it, they can just rent hash rate and then they can process it themselves. And the cost of hash rate is about break even. So it wouldn't even cost them that much money. So you cast forward, that's what I'm saying. Like, you just make things worse for yourself. You create a lot of risk and you didn't achieve anything. So I take what Chris is saying, that maybe if we punch at them incrementally, they'll give up and go away. But $1 million a day and $1 billion industry doesn't seem like it's going to go away.
Well, but again, this is what worked in 2014. Vitalik left because Bitcoiners showed that they were serious about countering every move from the spammers. It's a cat and mouse game, as a lot of people like to say, but it's a game that the cat can kind of easily win. You said that Bitcoin is hard to do spam filtration on. I disagree. I think it's easier to do spam filtration on Bitcoin than anywhere else because Bitcoin also requires a fee per block space. So that makes
the filter works
easier. Yeah, and so, but to your broader point, I don't disagree with any of those things. Of course, I'm looking into the future, and considering second and third order effects. It's just I think that the second and third order effects of a friendly stance towards spam is much worse than the effects of being hostile to spam. And so we have weak tools like filters, and we have strong tools like temporary soft fork or whatever, like you just said. and as you said, we can incrementally hit them harder and harder until they, take the hint and go somewhere else. And again, this is exactly what worked last time. So there's no reason it won't work this time.
Okay, you guys, we're running out of time, but I have like a few questions I absolutely have to ask you. So we're going to keep moving on. So Chris, I did want to ask you basically, I think the side of knots is that, the most important feature of Bitcoin is that it's money. And yet, I think some people, when they look at the fact that what knots wants to do would effectively, kind of block things like Citria and Lightning that are, or I don't know about Lightning, sorry, but Citria that are trying
I'm a Lightning maximalist.
Right, sorry. Citria that are trying to, broaden the use of Bitcoin as money. They find that to be hypocritical. So can you address that criticism?
Sorry, what do they find hypocritical?
Oh, that your side wants to prioritize the use of Bitcoin as money, and Citria would further that use, and yet you're what you're trying.
Yeah. Okay. So my stance on this is a little bit nuanced. So there's things that are applications and things that are layer twos. And I have a little bit of a hardline stance on this. I think that Lightning is a real layer two, and I think that Arc is a real layer two. And I don't think that Citria is a real layer two. And the reason why Citria is not a real layer two, whereas Arc and Lightning are, is because Arc and Lightning have something called unilateral exit or trustless exit. So that it's a completely trustless layer two. So meaning that you can take your money out of a Lightning channel whenever you want without asking anyone else permission, right? You just take the money. And so I would consider Lightning, Bitcoin to be in a Lightning channel to be Bitcoin as such. And those really scale Bitcoin. Those types of use cases really scale payments. Whereas Citria, it uses a one of n trust model. And so this is not trustless. It's almost trustless, but it's not entirely trustless. And so to me, if somebody wants to build that, I don't have a problem with that. I don't have a problem with somebody building Citria. What I do have a problem with is Citria coming in and saying, we're going to stuff our data into fake pub keys, which is something that all Bitcoiners know is you're just being a jerk if you do that. You're just being hostile if you do that. And then instead of the developers coming back and saying, "Hey guys, please don't do this," they're ripping out the filter that prevents this. And basically taking something that everybody came to consensus to about in 2014 and just unilaterally raising the limit from 80 to 100,000, which nobody agreed to. So for an app that isn't even a real layer two. Now, if it were a real layer two, then I would be much more excited about accommodating them. But they're not. So I don't see why we need to bend over backwards to filter their to relay their transaction.
They were going to do it anyway. They weren't asking for the change.
Exactly.
And Citria, and that's exactly the same pattern as op return in 2014. People doing things without permission that were inconvenient for nodes. I don't really accept the argument that it's not a real layer two. I mean, that's just one person's judgment against somebody else's attempt to build a layer two. It's trying to improve the state of the art in providing secure anchors to more flexible types of layer two, right? So it's something that can have a different payload, more like a sidechain kind of payload, or you could have a Fedimint in one of those. I think that'd be pretty cool, very high scale, very private. So
sure. I mean, again, all those things are cool, and it's fine if they build them. Let's just not redefine Bitcoin.
It's exactly the same pattern. So I mean, if you're saying you would want to block Citria at 160 bytes or whatever they take, that doesn't make sense to me. That's basically forcing them to do what they were going to do anyway, which is to use fake pub keys, right? Which
no one is forcing them to do anything. Like we all agreed in 2013 that 80 bytes is the max. If you want to build something that uses more than that, you need to get everyone's permission. You can't just go do it, or you're a jerk.
Well, okay.
I guess anyway, right?
Yeah, part of what I'm hearing, Chris, too, it makes me think, who put you in charge of what's a legitimate layer two? And I like you. I hope you're not taking that. I'm just trying to imagine what the critics are saying, who's to decide. But okay.
Well, what I'm saying is Bitcoiners decided that when we said 80 bytes is the amount of data that you can put in a transaction, that was the decision. And so if your protocol needs 144 bytes, then you can't build that on Bitcoin without making some people angry. And this has been here for 10 years. It's not some new thing. Everybody knows this.
Yeah. So let's now talk about this disagreement, because this is probably the big kahuna part of the episode. So I need to understand. something, and this is definitely going to be far more technical than I could do. I tried to kind of gather all the data around this, but I can't make sense of it myself. So if you just go to CoinDance, which has long been used for these types of, what do the miners support type questions in Bitcoin, it kind of looks like Bitcoin Knots is at about 22% of support when you just look at the nodes. But as far as I can tell from people who are far smarter than me, they've been talking about using something called ASMAP. I don't know what that stands for. But as far as I can tell, it basically allows you to see kind of which nodes not which nodes, but when nodes are controlling a large number of IP addresses, which would indicate that these nodes are actually one entity, sort of almost like the concept of a Sybil attack. So, I don't know if that's true, but there are people who are calling this out and who are saying that when they filter for that, then suddenly the number of knots nodes that they're connected to drops by like 90%. And so I might have gotten some of the technical details wrong, but I would like to hear from both of you. What do you think is the actual support for knots, and how do you figure that out? And then after that, we can move on to an even more important question. But tell me how you are figuring it out.
Let me give it a go, because I think we may not disagree, which is, I think some of those initial reports were too small a sample set to be meaningful. I think it's hard to say. It depends. It doesn't necessarily mean anything, right? There are some popular cloud hosting platforms that people may be using legitimately. There might be a bit of sibling on both sides, but I think ultimately it doesn't really matter. And I think the bigger point is that, even if Knots got to 90% or 99% or 100%, it wouldn't stop the spam.
Well, okay, but Adam, regardless just what do you think is the actual number of how much support there is for knots? Like, do you have a way of figuring that out?
I'm not sure. I mean, there's a lot of people that are economically interested that are not running nodes, and of course the drama, the kind of the drama cause more people to run nodes, which is generally a good thing. If you use a node economically and protect yourself from hostile forks, if we remember back to 2015 to 2017 discussions, that was the kind of genesis of the run your own node runner concept, which is generally good. So, you've got to bear in mind that Bitcoin's a peer-to-peer network, and like everything on the internet, people can do what they want. They can run what software they want. I think this debate is more about people trying to influence what software other people can run. And so I think the Knots view is that they would like the default to change because they think that has some impact. And generally, defaults do have impact. And I think the Bitcoin developers' view is that...
No, that's the opposite. That's the opposite. The core devs are trying to change the default, and Knots wants to keep it the same.
No, but the default in the Bitcoin reference implementation, as I understand it, the developers' view is that they have a kind of Hippocratic oath to keep the network operating reliably, react cautiously to network condition changes, fix bugs, keep the network robust, keep it secure, keep it decentralized. And there's an open development process whereby anyone can raise a valid technical objection. And to my knowledge, nobody's succeeded to do that. And I even repeat multiple times on Twitter that if anybody can develop...
Adam, I responded to that on Twitter with some actual technical objections, and you ignored them. And I called you out for ignoring them, and you still ignored them.
Okay, so Chris...
I didn't see them. So,
Chris,
but my genuine belief is that there are no valid technical objections. And if somebody wants to raise them, I'll go look at this thread. And if I'm persuaded that they're valid, and there are lots of other technical people looking at these threads, then that would be enough to pause a release, to cause a bug fix or what have you. But I simply don't think it's true. I think people have got wrapped up in some emotional logic. The only glimmer of truth in this whole thing is that maybe if we play whack-a-mole quickly enough, maybe we'll dishearten the spammers. But, the internet's been around for a long time. There's still people spamming. And in Bitcoin, they have a much higher payoff from spamming. Email spam payoff is incredibly low. The only thing that's really reliably working in Bitcoin is the fee market, which comes down to a block size limit and a market for the fees and proof of work, right?
Okay. Chris, answer just briefly and quickly, what % of support do you think Knots actually has, and how do you figure that out?
Yeah, the websites that show the percentages are very accurate because they're looking at the widest. So they're looking at listening nodes. So yeah, there's a reason why the AS map thing is how it is. As Adam said, it was a low sample size, and subsequent people ran the same exact test.
Okay, so you think it's like roughly 22%?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
And there is a thing with knots where there are fewer knots listening on ClearNet, and there's a good explanation for this. It's because a lot of knots runners are hobbyist node runners who use things like Umbrel and Start9 and Raspberry Blitz and things like that, and those things generally listen over Tor. And so a lot of people who are doing analysis are not taking Tor into account at all.
Okay, got it. So this is probably the most important question, and I'm sorry that we're going to have to wrap right after this, but I need to understand here. So here we have, potentially a situation in which 78% of the network is going to choose one route, and then the other 22% will choose another route. So and they disagree, and this is like contentious. So is this, the notion of a contentious hard fork that could result in a chain split, or okay? So explain that.
It's just what I was saying, that people on the internet can run whatever software they want, and so the main damage from running a NOTs node is it creates a bit of extra load for other nodes which are relaying more faithfully what's going on in the network, and it slows down the NOTs node. But effectively, it has nearly zero effect on spam and on the network ultimately. So it's not a fork issue. It's some people want to run some filters and some people want to run other filters, and there's nothing we can do to change their mind or stop them doing that. So I think that's fine, right? The internet's permissionless. What are you going to do, right?
Okay, Chris, do you agree with that outcome?
No, yeah, Adam. So you said it again. You said, there's practically nothing you can do to stop the spam. The filters don't do anything. And I'm telling you, look at the chart.
That's not
the cliff at 80 bytes. It's 99% reduction, going from exactly 80 bytes on up. So yeah, so Laura, you asked about 20% of the nodes filtering. Adam's correct. That won't do anything other than, okay, it will slow down block propagation a bit for those node runners and maybe for some other people on the network. But it's not, as far as I know a bunch of people that run NOTs nodes and they run Lightning nodes on top of NOTs nodes, and they haven't noticed any problems with that. And I know a lot of people mining, doing kind of home mining on top of NOTs nodes, and they haven't noticed any problems either. And so the argument is that, well, we need to remove this hop return limit for your own good. But we understand the risks and we think that they're worth it. And if 80 or 90% of us are running the filters, then we've seen that that's effective. So, I mean, it might take a couple more spam attacks to get there. But I think it's pretty easy once there's a will to stop the spam, that we will.
There's been a will to stop the spam since the internet started. Since 2009 in Bitcoin, there's a will to stop spam in Bitcoin developers and in people that want to be pro-filter. The only difference is being practical about it and thinking about the economic incentives. So
we should look at what worked last time.
It doesn't work.
It did.
Okay.
Look,
all right. So
how can you say it works after the sub 1 sat per vbyte summer, where if economically
there were very special circumstances there.
But listen carefully to what I'm saying. If economically motivated users want a functionality, I think $1 million a day counts as economically motivated, and miners go along with it. They are de facto going along with it. Even if the miners didn't go along with it, the spammers can rent hash rate. $1 million a day buys a lot of hash rate. If you rent the hash rate, you get to run the node and the policy. So how is that working?
Yeah,
it works until it doesn't for something nobody has an incentive to do.
Okay, Chris, go ahead.
Cool. Yeah, the circumstances were very special in full RBF and subsat transactions. Full RBF, the vast majority of node runners agreed with full RBF and were like, yeah, that's fine. These aren't harmful. So it's much easier for if core is filtering something that's harmless for that filter to go away than for something where core is filtering something that's harmful for that filter to go away. So subsat transactions are not that harmful, and full RBF is not that harmful, and that's why. And core was filtering them unnecessarily, which is
okay.
Yeah. You could say the same thing about inscriptions, right? Nobody's going to use op return because they're already using inscriptions. So why is it such a big deal that it changes? If they do use it, we just went through this, right? If they do use op return, it's less bad than if they use inscriptions because it's less data, it's prunable, and it costs them more per byte. And if they don't use it, what's the problem?
Okay, you guys, we really have to wrap because we have a second live stream. But you guys, the change is going to be pushed through by Core on Friday. So I think, or at least at this moment, that's what it looks like. They changed the release before, so who knows if they'll change it again. But anyway, point is, I think we'll have to see what happens at that time. But hopefully, this gave everybody a good primer of like what the arguments are on both sides. Thank you both so much to Chris and Adam for explaining this to our audience. And yeah, we'll have to see what happens on Friday.
All right.
Thanks, everyone. Unchained is produced by Laura Shin with help from Juan Aranovich, Margaret Curia, and Pam Majumdar. Thanks for listening.